Okay. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 11 tonight. And if anybody does not have the handout for 1 Samuel 11 and 12 and 13, raise your hand and one will be given to you. All right. 1 Samuel chapter 11. Now I know Sunday morning we kind of ended a little abruptly, so I just, briefly ask if anybody... You didn't get one. Luis wasn't here. She was forsaking the assembly to be at another assembly. Last week I know we ended chapter 10 kind of abruptly, and if there are any loose ends from the chapter that people just feel we gotta get to, I guess speak now. Otherwise, we're going to get into 1 Samuel chapter 11, and we'll start by reading the first 4 verses. Somebody read the first 4 verses. Okay. Now before we do anything else, does anybody have like a footnote on verse 1 or kind of a much larger version of verse 1? Peggy? Did you? No? Oh, no. I'm in verse 1 of chapter 11, sorry. In their Bible. Okay, well, there's not, it's not indicated in all versions, and it's in the New Revised Standard Version. There is a reading that's been adapted from the Dead Sea Scrolls that includes this phrase. Now Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, had been oppressing the Gadites and the Reubenites grievously, gouging out the right eye of each of them, and allowing Israel no deliver. No men of the Israelites who were across the Jordan remained, whose right eye Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, had not gouged out. But 7,000 men had escaped from the Ammonites and entered into Jabesh Gilead. Now Nahash the Ammonite came up and besieged Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you." That's a pretty big block of text that has been, either added or dropped out, depending on scribal issues. That is an old reading. It's, dates to at least the time of Jesus. It's in some of the oldest available Hebrew manuscripts. It doesn't really change anything, as far as our salvation goes. But I thought it was kind of cool to read that Nahash was going around and gouging out everybody's right eye, right and left, and he was apparently had been engaging in this quite a bit. It also, I think, better explains chapter 12 and verse 12, where we learned that Nahash, king of the sons of Ammon, he's not just coming up against one city, he came up against the whole nation as a result of that. He was ravaging the whole region of Reuben and Gilead in the Transjordan area. And it adds a context to why Jabesh Gilead is singled out. Some men had escaped from him and he was planning to capture them. Well, of course, Nahash the Ammonite, what's he doing to Jabesh Gilead? Why is he behaving this way towards them? What's he planning to do? Huh? He's got nothing better to do. He just likes to gouge people's eyes out?
Well, one of the ways the nation wealthy, king, was to conquer other nations. That's what this treaty was. You're going to be my servants and you're going to pay me tribute.
Yeah. But why gouge out their right eyes? That seems just kind of brutal. What's the reason for that?
If you ever get into a fight with somebody that's bigger than you, gouge out one of their eyes, probably fight. Instantly causes the person to lose depth perception and throws them into a turmoil.
Yes, gouging out the right eye would have made the people of the city basically worthless for battle because, it destroyed their depth perception. Let me ask another question. Jabesh Gilead, where have we seen this city before? Anybody remember a significant story that we read recently that involved Jabesh Gilead? And this question, I don't think this question's on the handout, but no. Where have we seen this city before? Has the city ever been destroyed before? Should have put that question on the handout in hindsight. Judges 21. What happens in Judges 21?
Of Israel taken by vowed they were not going to give their daughters to the sons of Benjamin. Men of Benjamin marriage, and they killed all of the women and children. Benjamin basically tried their bunch of men and no women. So they asked, well, who didn't go up against with us against Benjamin? And not. So allowed them to fly from Gilead.
All right. So Jabesh Gilead has been destroyed once before, by Israel of all people. Here the Ammonites are going to attack Jabesh Gilead, which shows that the city's been rebuilt since the time of the judges. Nahash toys with the inhabitants by, oh, fine, I'm going to give you 7 days to get help. Do you think he's expecting help to come? It doesn't appear so. And the messengers, of course, it says in verse 4, the messengers come to Gibeah of Saul. Where have we seen the city of Gibeah before? Judges chapter 19, that's where the Levite's concubine was raped by the inhabitants of that city. And then Israel subsequently declared war on Gibeah and the entire tribe of Benjamin. So you might say that in the past, Jabesh Gilead was destroyed so that Gibeah could be repopulated. Now Jabesh Gilead's having to cry out to Gibeah for help. They send their messengers to Gibeah, and that's where Saul happens to be. And, well, let's read verses 5 through 11. Somebody read those verses.
Behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen. Saul said, "What is wrong with the people? They're weeping." So they told him the news of Jabesh. The Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words. Anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces, and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel, and a message saying, "Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen." Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out in one man. When he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000 to 30,000. They said to the messengers who had come, "Thus shall you say to the men of Gilead, tomorrow by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation." The messengers came and told the men of Gilead. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, "Tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, that you may do to us whatever seems good to you." And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies. They came to the midst of the morning watch, struck down the Ammonites until the day. Those who survived were scattered, so that no two were left together.
All right, so Saul hears the news of Nahash's oppression, and how does he react to it? He's angry. He's so angry he does what? He calls on the people. The Spirit of God comes on him mightily. Okay, that's important. Yeah. And what's he do? How does he call on the people?
He takes some oxen, cuts them up into pieces. He says, "If you don't get out here and deliver your brethren, your oxen will get the same treatment."
Let me ask you something.
Oxen were their livelihood.
Okay, so he kills these oxen. He cuts them in pieces. He sends them throughout Israel. Have we seen this anywhere before? I'm starting to see a pattern here. Are you? We're kind of seeing a lot of throwbacks to that Judges 19, 20, and 21 story. And it's on purpose. The narrator is doing this on purpose. He kills the oxen he's driving. He cuts them into pieces. He sends them throughout Israel. This is clearly a call to action. Just like the Levite did to his concubine, Saul does this to his oxen. And, it isn't just, we got a piece of a dead ox shown to us. Saul also sends it with a threat. if you don't come out and fight, I'm going to do this to your oxen. I did it to my oxen, so I'm not afraid to do it to yours. Saul, he's basic. What he did to himself, he will do to others. He shows how serious he is. And another point, I thought this was really interesting in verse 7. Whoever does not come out after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. Saul does not see himself here as the sole ruler of Israel. He has himself kind of, Samuel is also there, and Samuel's still an important leadership figure. So it's interesting how Samuel is paired with him there. Now the image of cutting into pieces, that definitely reminds us of Judges 19:29. Well, they go to war against Ammon, and the Israelites come out. In verse 8, there's actually two figures given to the army. 300,000 for the sons of Israel, 30,000 for the men of Judah. This is, if I'm correct, I think this may be the first time in the Bible that we see two census figures given for the nation, one for Israel and one for Judah. This is not the last time we're going to see this phenomenon taking place. Now, it's either that Samuel's retrospective and he's looking back and kind of foreshadowing the divided kingdom, or possibly it just kind of hints at the idea that the nation is already starting to kind of feel a schism between itself before we even get to 1 Kings chapter 12. In either case, there is kind of a rift between Israel and Judah that we're going to start to see throughout the book of Samuel. When he promises deliverance by the time the sun is hot the next day, the battle itself doesn't get much description, does it? Verse 11 is the only verse that really talks about the battle proper. The Ammonites are scattered. No two are left together. It's kind of like the battles in Judges, where all the events leading up to it are given more attention and more detail than the actual battle itself. So I think that's kind of interesting as well. And the reason why is, the outcome's already decided. Whoever God fights for wins. That's the way the Bible views battles. This battle wins Saul the permanent loyalty of Jabesh Gilead, and it also wins their loyalty to both him and his family. Whenever Saul dies and the Philistines capture his body and they mount it in their open square and say, Saul, we've triumphed over Saul, it is the men of Jabesh Gilead who recover the body and bury it. And Jabesh Gilead is not exactly right next door to the Philistine territory either. They had to go a decent distance to get there. And then they had to fight through the Philistines to recover the body. But they have pretty much undying loyalty to Saul as a result of that. In 1 Samuel 31 in verses 11 through 13. They also recovered the bones of Jonathan. We learn that in 2 Samuel 21:12. David commends their loyalty for that later. Now, in verses 12 and 13, the people say to Samuel, I'll just read verses 12 to 13. The people said to Samuel, "Who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished deliverance in Israel." Now these detractors were mentioned back in chapter 10 and verse 27. There were certain worthless men, certain sons of Belial. It's the same expression actually that's used of Eli's sons in chapter 2 verse 11. Certain worthless men said, "How can this one deliver us?" And they despised him and did not bring him any present. But he kept silent. So the entire nation is not enamored with Saul. There's some people there that don't like him very much. And now after the battle's over, they want to kill these detractors. Mark, you got something?
Messenger message about what happened to David. Where's Saul? Working with you. Not really like a king.
No.
I don't think he really knew. At that point, it seems like there wasn't a whole lot of a concept of what a king was all about.
Well,
at least to Saul.
As far as what we know about Saul's reign, he didn't appear to have a very... The thing about Saul's reign, as far as from a strictly historical political perspective, he wasn't a very powerful king, and he wasn't a very wealthy king. His palace is modest compared to the ancient Near Eastern, or at least what they think is his palace. They haven't really decided whether what they found is his palace or not yet, but it's either David's or Saul's. They're kind of still arguing about it, it seems to reflect his reign seems to reflect very modest circumstances. The Bible doesn't really portray him as having control over the whole nation either. There's no point in the Bible story is Saul ever anywhere north of the Jezreel Valley. It's kind of interesting to note that. Which may suggest he wasn't, didn't really have quite a unified following as David got later. But Saul, he's the first guy. They're still getting used to having a king. Let's give him some credit. But Saul had some detractors, and the reaction is, well, who are these men? Well, get those detractors out here. Let's put them to death. How dare they oppose our king? They're disloyal. And Saul refuses to put his detractors to death. Why? Because, not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has accomplished deliverance in Israel. How do we evaluate something like this? Saul had respect for the Lord at one point in his life, didn't he? Israel decides, that anyone who previously opposed Saul's reign must die. And Saul is the one who's merciful. Saul is within his right to kill, and yet he chooses to exercise mercy. There's a similar conversation that takes place in 2 Samuel 19. After Absalom's rebellion, Shimei cursed David and said all kinds of nasty things about him as he was traveling along. They come back to the kingdom after Absalom's been defeated, and they have a big argument. Are we going to put Shimei to death because he cursed the king? And David refuses to do this out of mercy. Even though he cursed the Lord's anointed, David will not have him killed. He later has his son do it, but that's another story for another day. I guess just looking at all this, I ask this question. Is Saul's reign initially a success? Yes. And that I think is basically what we're going on. Now, we pointed out before, there's several echoes of that epilogue to Judges. Judges 19, 20, and 21. That really dark story about the Levite and his concubine and the subsequent war and the near destruction of Benjamin and all those things. Jabesh Gilead is about to be destroyed again. Saul lives in Gibeah, the oxen being cut into pieces, sent out throughout Israel to summon for war. The whole nation gathers together as one man. Last time we read about them having done that was in Judges 20. And throughout Judges 19, 20, and 21, there's a certain phrase that permeates the text. In those days, there was no king in Israel. So, we're kind of, as a reader, we're kind of asking ourselves the question, is this going to solve the problem from Judges 19, 20, and 21? We're supposed to be asking that question as we read. And the narrator, I think, wants us to see Saul in a good light for a minute. Because we have to identify with Saul, and we have to identify with the nation of Israel, who's, we've finally gotten a king. He's really going to save us. We're supposed to cling to their hope and everything that stands for it, because the story's setting us up to be disappointed by that. Saul is not the king Saul does not turn out to be this kind of king. He has this initial success, but then his downfall. You can't have a tragic downfall without having somewhere to start. And that's what Saul's getting, is his starting point here. And the rest of 1 Samuel is going to be detailing a very sad story. You think about Saul later. The man who fought Israel's enemies later cowers behind his troops at the threat of Goliath, and then spends the bulk of his reign hurting and fighting one of his own most loyal servants, David. The man who refuses to put to death his own detractors here in chapter 11 later tries to murder his most loyal and helpful servant David, and then actually kills the priests of God for giving David bread. Saul goes a long way from refusing to kill his detractors to killing the priests of the Lord. And it's only 10 chapters from now that starts to really unravel. Keep that in mind anyways. Okay, any comments or questions down to verse 13 of chapter 11? All right, verses 14, chapter 11, down to chapter 12, verse 5. Chapter 12, verse 5. Somebody read. All right. Now, Samuel's... Well, first of all, what's the point of Samuel gathering the people to Gilgal? Why does he do this? To make Saul king? Wait, didn't they already make Saul king?
Well, there's making kind of doing firm.
Yes. Yeah, Saul's actually made king 3 times in the text. If you know, there's first when Samuel anoints him privately in chapter 10. And then later on in chapter 10, he's more publicly chosen as king and is kind of an open ceremony. And then in chapter 12, they make him king again, kind of reaffirm the whole thing. I don't know if it's like the difference between being elected and being inaugurated, but that's kind of an anachronistic parallel. But Don, you got something? Right, yeah. No, that's a kind of a... the people have been brought together to make Saul king. This threefold anointing of Saul as king, we're later going to see the same thing with David. David is made king 3 times. First, privately by Samuel in 1 Samuel 16 and verse 13. Secondly, in 2 Samuel chapter 2, he's anointed king over the nation of Judah. And Israel's kind of the divided kingdom before there was a divided kingdom. That's what's going on. David is king over Judah. Ishbosheth is king over all Israel. Ishbosheth dies, and then the rest of the elders of Israel come and make David king a 3rd time at Hebron. So 3 anointings for Saul, 3 anointings for David. I'm sure that if I really dig, I can probably come up with 3 anointings for Jesus, but I haven't thought of that parallel yet. So we'll stick with that. If somebody comes up with it, I'll be interested to hear it. I'll just say that. In Samuel's speech, the first 5 verses, I didn't really have a question about this on the handout, but what's the point he's making in the first 5 verses of his speech here? What's he trying to convey to the nation? Yeah, he stayed true. What? Okay, there's kind of a covenant restoration going on here. Okay, yeah, that's going to be important as we get into this. Don. Yeah, we're witnesses. So what about Samuel? His integrity. He hasn't taken any of their stuff. There's kind of a little jab back at what happened in chapter 8, because Samuel is going on and on about how, if you make a king, he's going to take all your stuff, he's going to take all your livestock, he's going to take all your things, he's going to take your sons and daughters. And here he just kind of asks in chapter 12, so who have I done that to? I haven't done that to any of you, have I? Okay, just remember that. Your witnesses against yourself. Just leave that in their minds and get them to think about that a little bit. He hasn't defrauded anyone. He hasn't oppressed anyone. He hasn't taken bribes. And if someone can show him otherwise, he'll repay it. But the truth is that Samuel hasn't done these things. Israel agrees. Samuel is not defrauded or oppressed them. And Yahweh and His anointed are both witnesses to this statement. In verses 6 through 11, Samuel kind of recalls their history. Somebody read those verses. Okay. But why do you think, well, why does Samuel tell their history in this way? What is his point that he's trying to make? Rely on God, okay. Okay, it is God who delivers you. Yeah. I guess that Samuel's intention is kind of to plead with them, or, I guess in one way you can translate it as judge them.
There's another aspect. Then they cried out.
They messed up and then they cried out to the Lord. That's been their whole history, hasn't it? There's a double repetition of this actually. In verse 8 and in verse 10, he uses the phrase, they cried out to the Lord. They cried out to the Lord. And of course, all of this is, there's really two events he discusses. One of them is the Exodus. Jacob enters Egypt. The fathers cry out to the Lord, and the Lord sends Moses and Aaron to deliver. And then there's the time of the judges. Israel enters the promised land. They forget God and are oppressed by Sisera. They cry out to the Lord and they repent. And the Lord sends Jerubbaal, which is another name for Gideon, Bedan, which is probably an alternate spelling of Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel to deliver. And kind of covers the whole spectrum of the judges there. But now, and this is the contrast that's being set up here in verses 12 through 18. Somebody read those. Down to verse 18.
Now therefore, they not I will call
Okay. Now, Samuel's kind of recounted their history. You were in Egypt, you cried out to the Lord, and he sent Moses and Aaron. You were, being oppressed by Sisera, you cried out to the Lord, he sent the judges. You saw Nahash the Ammonite coming, and what did you do? Cried out to who? Does it say they cried out to the Lord when Nahash, king of the Ammonites, came upon them? Yeah, they said this time it's, no, but a king shall reign over us. Although the Lord God is your king. Suddenly they've kind of shifted away from their original way of doing it. Instead of crying out for the Lord, they cry out for a human king. Now, as stated before, the problem is not, the fact that they ask for a king. The problem is their motive for doing so. Their reason is because they think the king can save them. But he can't. Yahweh is the one who saves. They forget that salvation is Yahweh's territory. It is His prerogative. It is His ability and His alone. It is He who empowered the deliverers of the past to do it. And if the king delivers them, it will be by His hand that the king does it. It's truly the Lord's hand that works through that king. And so Samuel says, all right, you're getting what you asked for. Here is the king whom you have chosen. Well, technically God's the one that picked Saul, but God picked the kind of king that Israel wanted, didn't he? He picked not a man after his own heart, but a king like the nations, king after the people's heart. He selects Saul as king, and Samuel, even though Yahweh personally selected Saul, Samuel still calls him the king that the king that Israel chose. And so now they're going to be like the nations. And in the context of this king, what does Samuel exhort the people to do? Yeah, this can still work with the king, guys. It can still work. But you have to do something. You have to fear the Lord. Fear the Lord and serve Him. Don't rebel. If you rebel, you will be punished. Serve Yahweh with all your heart. Serve Him and fear Him and serve Him in truth. Let me ask you something. Does this speech that Samuel's giving, does it remind us of any other speeches we've read in the Bible? Moses? Which one of Moses? The exhortations in Deuteronomy to, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and certainly the book of Deuteronomy permeates with that. Joshua is another one, and in some ways even closer parallels, just, the whole brief snippet of covenant renewal, we might say, of recounting their history, fear the Lord, serve Him in sincerity and truth. That's the parallel we're supposed to see here. At the end of the Exodus and the conquest, Joshua gave a farewell speech to the people in which he exhorted them to serve God. Now, they didn't do what Joshua said. They forsook the Lord everywhere they went, pretty much. At every turn that was available to them. And their nation was plunged into a very dark time. Now, the end of the time of the judges, they get the same speech again. Fear the Lord, serve Him in sincerity and truth. Is it going to end differently this time? We can hope. But, of course, we're going to see that Saul is not much different from the judges as we continue reading the book. Now, in verses 16 through 18, there's kind of a sign given for the people. Today is the wheat harvest, but God will send thunder and rain. Why does God thunder at the people? What's the point of this? Well, why does He thunder at them? Yeah. Confirmation of what? Okay, confirmation of their sinful and wicked ways. It's not just a coincidence. This is the wheat harvest. Wheat harvest is usually in May to June. In that region, rain rarely falls. The presence of thunder and rain, especially at Samuel's bidding, would be recognized as a sign of supernatural intervention. You remember back in chapter 7 when Israel fought the Philistines? What was God's weapon of choice in that battle? You remember? Hail. Chapter 7, in verse 10. Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, and the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But the Lord thundered with a great thunder on that day against the Philistines and confused them, so that they were routed before Israel. God uses thunder to strike fear into the hearts of the enemy and cause them to be routed. But here He turns His weapon of choice against Israel and causes them to fear and to be terrified. Perhaps a reminder that Israel has become a little bit too much like the Philistines in their military philosophy. Yes, Gail. Some people have brought that up, that some people have brought up that there's a kind of a covenant curse thing going on here, and that their food has been destroyed as a result of that. I'm not really sure what to do with that personally. But that view is definitely out there. Yeah. Yeah, how much rain does He send? We got to wonder about that. There is a covenant curse that the Lord would destroy the crops if they violated the covenant. I mean, and literally I just read that one today, so I'm still kind of just trying to decide what I think about it. But there may be something to that. There's another element in 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 10. It says that those who contend with the Lord will be shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth and will give strength to his king and will exalt the horn of his anointed. Thunder is kind of God's weapon of choice in 1 Samuel. He uses it against the Philistines. Now he uses it against Israel to expose their sin. And the response of the people is what? How do people react to this? They're fearful, just like Samuel told them. Fear the Lord, right? And so we get to verse 19, and all the people say, somebody read verses 19 to the end of the chapter. All right. So the people beg Samuel, intercede on our behalf, pray for us so that we don't die. And they confess, we have sinned in asking for a king. And this is done before any additional foreign oppressor came on them, so I guess that's a good thing. And Samuel tells them, this thunder has just come on them to cause them to fear. And Samuel tells them in verse 20 what? Do not fear. Now fear the Lord, don't fear. And then a little later on, fear the Lord again. You get kind of this bouncing back and forth between those two ideas. In the same speech, he tells them to fear twice and to not fear once. It's kind of similar to Mount Sinai in a way. In Exodus chapter 20 and verse 20, Moses told Israel, do not fear. God has come to test you in order that the fear of him may remain with you and you not sin. Don't be afraid. God's just trying to make you afraid.
What's that bottom level of but as you grow in your faith, really serving God with all your heart.
Yeah, I think that part of the idea here is that, there are two kinds of fears. Fear that, there's the fear that, of course, paralyzes somebody into total inaction. And then there's the actual fear that we are supposed to have. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of God. Hebrew writer talks about that. The Bible kind of makes that contrast. On the one hand, there is a right kind of fear to have, and there's a wrong kind of fear to have. And that's, I think, kind of the idea that's being put across here when it says, fear the Lord. Don't be afraid. Fear the Lord. There's this back and forth. And he's using the same Hebrew term for them, but it's, I think we are supposed to, it's supposed to get us to think. Verse 21, don't turn aside. Don't go after futile things that can't save or deliver. Don't go after idols. Don't go after riches. Don't go after military might. Or, don't go after the things that the world calls beneficial to a nation. Go after the things that God says are beneficial to a nation. God says in verse 22, he will not abandon his people. He still loves them. He still wants to make them people for himself. Samuel in verse 23 is not going to sin by ceasing to pray. But, verse 24, you better fear the Lord. Why? Because if you continue acting wickedly, then the Lord will abandon his people. He will forsake you, and you and your king will be swept away. A warning that gets fulfilled in Israel's history. I gave them a king in my anger, and I took him away in my wrath, Hosea 13 says. That brings us to the end of chapter 12. Are there any last minute thoughts just throw in? Or? Okay. Next time we will look at chapter 13. So be ready for that. Read, and of course be reading as much of Samuel as you can while we are studying this. Thank you.